Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, and we have a full house today. I'm very excited about our presenter and our topic today. But just a couple of things I want to mention. First of all, please silence your mobile devices so we don't have any interruptions, because it's going to be a great discussion ahead of us. And also, I just remind you of the monthly program next Tuesday at Jack Miller, beginning at 9:30. It's going to be on artificial intelligence. And so I think that's going to be a great topic. I have member Gary Morris, who happens to be on the Science, Medicine, and Technology Committee, is going to be the presenter. So I think that'll be a great topic. And I also think we're going to do some housekeeping business for HASP with approving or voting on some bylaw and constitutional changes. So you should have seen some of that information coming out. To get started with our program today, I first want to acknowledge one of our HASP members here in the back, Gloria Veltman. Can you raise your hand, Gloria? Gloria has worked in law enforcement and is retired from that. And she knew our presenter today, and she approached me about having Dr. Kuersten come and talk about her efforts that she's doing at Western Michigan University. I bring this up because I'm very thankful for Gloria to bring this topic and present her to me. And I also want to encourage any of you, if you have any ideas of a topic you'd like, bring it to anybody here at HASP. If you bring it to Ian or Amy, they'll distribute it to the committee chairs, and we'll get it working on it. So that's how this class came to you today, because of Gloria. So thank you, Gloria. Okay, I am Sue Couch. I'm the chairperson of the Science, Medical, and Technology Committee, and I'm so excited about this class today. We have Dr. Ashlyn Kuersten from Western Michigan University. You may have seen her on TV recently. She is working on this cold case project out of Western Michigan University, solved 2 of them. She's going to talk all about it. She was on Wood TV on a couple of issues, and I think she's going to tell you all the other efforts that she does with it. Just a little bit of background on her. She's a professor in Criminal Justice Studies program at WMU and director of the cold case program with Michigan State Police. She's received several teaching awards as well as grants from the National Science Foundation and the United States Department of Justice. She holds a PhD from the University of South Carolina. So welcome, Dr. Kuersten.
Thank you, sir. Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I know Hope College fairly well. Right after I started teaching here at Western, I watched the documentary from Professor Schock about the Janet Chandler case. And I was a baby professor, but I remember one of the students in the documentary saying, "This meant so much to me because we're her same age." And it always stuck with me. Also, the idea that it's kind of like what Margaret Mead says about never doubt that a group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only way that we've ever changed the world. I worked on several different cases as a constitutional law professor. But one thing that always resonated with me since watching that Janet Chandler documentary was that we have so many cold cases here, particularly here in Michigan. We hold one of the highest levels of any state in the nation for cold homicide and missing person cases. And what I've learned in my many years of getting grants and trying to do projects like this is you oftentimes hear the state doesn't have money. We'd love to. What a great idea, but we don't have money. And so I came up with this idea to, number one, change the world, make the world a better place. There's lots and lots of victim family members, lots of them who don't have closure of what happened to their beloved family members. I've never experienced that. I can only imagine. That just must be horrific. We need to do something about that. I also realized that in these days of, low public resources, that our state police don't have the resources to research cold cases because they're incredibly labor intensive. But I work with a bunch of really eager college students, and they want real world experiences. They learn from textbooks, very objective measures and examples, but they don't actually get real world experience. And they want to be the next generation of law enforcement. So I cooked up this idea. What if I could use college students and train them, have detectives help train them as the future of law enforcement? They assist detectives in solving cold cases, and ultimately we give all these victim family members some closure. Well, as you can imagine, it took me a while to convince my university and the state police that this was a good idea, but this is the program that I ultimately cooked up. So I was given a case finally after lots of persuasion. As a state police detective I work with said, "You're really persuasive." Yeah, finally they got the idea that maybe this would work. This would be a good idea. And so they handed me the first case, and that was the Roxanne Woods case. Roxanne Wood was a 30-year-old married woman living in Niles, Michigan. In 1987, she met her husband after work. He was coming from work. She was coming from work. So they both had their own vehicles. They met at a local bowling alley. They had some drinks, visited with friends, dinner, etc. Or later into the evening, she said, "I'm tired, I'm going home." And he said, "I'm right behind you." And he followed her home about 45 minutes later. When he walked into the house, he was horrified to find her dead. Her throat was slashed on their kitchen floor. She had put up quite a fight. She was quite a kind of a badass, really worked this guy over. Then the case kind of went cold. Obviously, her husband, Terry, was the primary suspect for the decades that followed. The state police couldn't pin anything on him. He was not her rapist. His blood wasn't at the scene, but he was the last person to see her both at the bowling alley and then later that night when he found her. The state police, Michigan State Police, or I say MSP throughout this presentation, they had opened the case a few times, as what happens with most cold cases. But the thing is with these cold cases, when it's open multiple times, I think the best way to explain it is imagine like a box that you have, and you all have this junk box. I know you do. We all do this. And it's in a closet and you don't really look at it that much. But every time you have something that's kind of in that general category, you throw it in there, right? And over the years, you haven't really looked to see exactly what's in there. And now, oh my, such a mess. You don't even know where to start. That's what happens with these cold cases. It gets opened and reopened and technology changes, right? So in the 1980s, they were using cassette tapes. We don't even have cassette tape recorders anymore. So it's hard to put the whole case in perspective for the current detectives that are working with the case. So we received, as the first case, about 35 banker boxes that looked like something from, your closet. It had papers and cassette recordings. It had lists of evidence that had been collected. Some evidence had been tested, but the technology that they tested it with was older technology. In other words, the detectives didn't really know what they had. Right? If you don't know what you have, it's a little hard to begin a research project, which is essentially what a cold case is. My students are perfect at this. They organized over 3,500 pages of documentation into some semblance of order that made sense for the new detectives that were working on the case. And in less than a year, we were able to assist the state police in identifying Roxanne Woods, rapist and killer. The case did not go to trial. In 2021, or 2022, I'm sorry, he pled no contest and was able to take a plea. He is now in prison for the rest of his life. That got us a lot of attention. What a great idea. Everybody says, yeah, if only they would have listened to me before, that would have been great. So we got a lot of media attention, and I thought the best way to begin this presentation is just by showing you one of the stories that was done. This was on the Today Show right after Patrick Gillam's sentence.
All of this we get from the Michigan State Police. We have boxes, laptops, binders, just full of documents and other evidence.
Mackenzie Stoneman's a senior at Western Michigan University, but she's also kind of a detective.
We could be looking for names, addresses, contact information, other evidentiary information that could be case specific.
She's part of the school's cold case program that has a few select students sifting through boxes of evidence, helping state police crack cases that have gone decades without answers.
It wasn't just reading chapters in a book, taking a test, memorizing it, and then forgetting everything that we learned. It was working on something that could change the trajectory of the whole case.
You're always looking for that perfect scenario to get students to just dive right in.
Professor Ashlyn Kuersten started the cold case program last year after forming a friendship with state police detective Chuck Christensen.
I started talking to Chuck, and he had all of these cold cases with the Michigan State Police, and I had all these brilliant students who want to learn these research skills, and they're interested in law enforcement. I mean, you see where I'm going with this? This is just like, this is so easy.
How does this program work? You get the evidence, essentially boxes like this.
Yes.
And what happens?
So they organize it and then they scan it all and make it into a digital reference guide, the actual case. So thousands of pieces of data end up getting turned into something that detectives can keep on their phone, and they can do a quick search on anything.
How much do just those few things, those few steps that they're involved in help you?
We had a case here where we had 4 detectives just doing that organizational phase for 6 months. Every single scrap of information that is in investigators' notes, in police reports, in lab reports, in autopsy reports is at your fingertip. Just think of the time that saves. It's unbelievable.
The program's already had a huge win. The first case they worked on, a murder from 1987, solved with the suspect pleading no contest to the crime.
The first case this program really gets its hands on leads to a conviction. What did that feel like?
Disbelief, just because, I mean, we worked on it for so long, and it's a cold case. It's been cold for decades. And so when we started, all right, well, this name pops up. Okay. And then it's like, oh, well, we're looking into him. He's been arrested. Oh, this is becoming very real. This is becoming very surreal. I just can't believe this is happening.
Will this impact what you do after you graduate?
I always thought I wanted to go into law enforcement, so this has really given me confidence, and this is what I actually want to do.
Now, Professor Kuersten and Detective Christensen say they've been getting calls from other schools to help start similar programs.
I think in Michigan, unfortunately, we have a lot of cold cases, so I hope we can get student eyes onto other cold cases in the area and hopefully get those families the closure that they need and deserve.
Do you all sort of feel like a team of detectives?
I do. Yeah. A little Scooby-Doo crew.
Yeah.
I know, right? Now, the suspect in that case they helped solve has been sentenced to at least 23 years in prison. And now these students are already working on 2 new cases. Detective Christensen told me there are about 22 unsolved cold cases in his district, so they'll have their hands full. And get this, he also says that he estimates the work these students are doing is saving Michigan State Police hundreds of thousands of dollars because of the hours of work they're taking off their plate by digitizing all this.
I think it's genius. You go to some of these smaller cities and the officers and the detectives, they don't have time to go all over all of these older cases. So you take a young college student who's internet savvy.
And they have a lot of college students interested. She said it's going to be hard to pick because it's this program, kind of an extra time where she has hundreds of students trying to apply for just a spot.
Would have gotten away with it, one for those meddling kids.
Exactly. So it was a good story, and we ended up, yes, since then, it's just been a wild ride of media stories. We've been 48 hours. It's also been part of the experience for the students is learning how to deal with a media interview. And you can imagine there's a lot that they can't say right? And so they're having to learn confidentiality and rules, which we all do as professionals, but usually this age of students, they don't get that experience of, being on 48 hours or something. So in the Roxanne Woods case, we, just like with most of the cases that we work on, we spend over 1,200 hours organizing case file material. We work extensively with the detectives who are assigned to these cases. We meet with the detectives at least once a week and try to make meaning of the material before we start putting it into a digital format. Some of the cases we work on are massive. One of the ones we're currently working on ended up being 70,000 pages of a case file. So this is bigger than the students like working on a book project, right? I mean, a book isn't 70,000 pages. So it takes a lot of organizing, and that's really the beauty of what they're able to do for the detectives in developing new leads. And the detectives, each week that they meet with the students, not only hear what the students have found out last week since they last met with him or her, but they're also getting like kind of homework assignments from the detectives. Can you find out if this guy was really in the military, or does he just say that on social media? Can you find out who lived in this neighborhood in 1982? Things like that. And how does this person know this person? Did they go to high school? Are they at the same church? Where is actually the connection between them? So those homework assignments are pretty extensive, and they become part of the students' educational work product, because they're learning research skills in a better way than I've ever been able to design a research project for them, because it's real, right? They're able to impact a real world case. They turn the paper file into a digital format. We have kind of a method for how we do this to help the detectives, but it's nice because the detectives then can put this digital PDF file onto their tablet or their laptop, and in the field, they can do a search on somebody's name or a partial license plate or a location or a friend that may be mentioned in the file. This leads to like much deeper reviews of evidence. So there's sometimes evidence that was collected, but there was no follow-up on it. And now that we have it in this digital format, you can really see in detail what's been done and what needs to be done. So the detectives ask the students for things like timelines, or we call it a spaghetti spiral of family, how all of these people are connected with one another. The students have created, and of course, they're very savvy with computer programs that are out there. They've created interactive digital maps. What was the weather like on the day that she went missing, for example, would be when did the sun go down? We're able to exclude people based on evidence that's been collected or that needs to be tested. And ultimately, we are able to come up with a list of evidence that's available and can still be tested. And believe it or not, there are a lot of cases like that where the detectives just don't know. In the Roxanne Woods case, we were able, sorry, I'm having a really hard time with this mic today. Sorry about that. In the Roxanne Woods case, the students were able to attend the suspect and later defendants' interviews with the state police, of course, behind a screen, but that was really helpful for them. They were able to do meetings with the genetic genealogists and even the prosecutor's offices. The other nice thing about this marriage between a public institution and a public institution is like many schools, we have a lot of other people like me that there might not be constitutional law scholars, but like our university librarian, we have one who is definitely a consultant and was one on the Roxanne Woods case. I'm telling you what, give it like 5 years, the leaders of the world are going to be librarians, because everything is digitized. It's magic. I'm serious. It is magic what these people can find that, somebody like me could spend 50,000 years looking for. And they'll be like, oh yeah, I found this church bulletin from 1972 and here's what it said. I don't know. I don't understand it. We are also, like in missing person cases, we work with a forensic anthropologist that's a professor there, and also a geophysicist. She has a ground penetrating radar that's perfect for looking for missing person cases. So as you can imagine, a lot of students want to get into this program. I've advised now 42 other states on how to set up similar programs with their state police and their universities, and they're all seeing the same kind of unbelievable interest. I'm getting something around the 1,000 application mark, 1,000 people applying for each semester. So the way we've managed this is, first the students take a preliminary class on cold case investigations. That allows me to see what kind of students they are, as I'm sure many of you educators could empathize with. Just because you get good grades does not always mean you're a creative thinker, right? Sometimes the C student is the one that actually thinks outside the box. So I'm always looking for that. The students, we are open to all majors. I find that researching these kinds of cases is truly interdisciplinary work. And by the way, I just realized, I don't think I told you this, but if you have any questions while I'm talking, just indicate. I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. Open to all the majors. We have about 15 spots each semester. That changes slightly, but the students are organized into essentially 3 teams, and each team gets 1 cold case or missing person case for each semester. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it depends on the case, of course. Oftentimes, with 1,200 hours into a case, we have a pretty good idea. And just because we close it does not necessarily mean law enforcement closes it, right? Yeah, but yeah, they're looking to see what kind of evidence could be tested. And usually 1,200 hours, we have a pretty good idea whether to carry it through the next semester. The students, of course, are heartbroken to leave, and they want this as a career, which, yeah, that would be great, wouldn't it? I haven't figured out how to do that one yet. So we have multiple cases going on in any one time as well. You have to be a WMU student. I get a lot of requests for people in the public that say, hey, I'd love to be able to harness that, but we have some challenges security wise. I have an encrypted computer system. We haven't figured out how to open something like this up to the public and have a encrypted computer system like that. Encrypted just meaning, you crawl into the system and you can't email anything outside. Can you imagine if an autopsy photo or something ended up on someone's social media account? That would just be tragic for the families. You have to be at least a sophomore. I've been teaching for a really long time, and my experience has been that usually your first year of college, you're away from your mom and dad for the first time, and you do some stupid things. That involves not getting a lot of sleep. Alcohol's involved. I know it's shocking, but alcohol is always involved, and members of the opposite sex and all those kind of interesting things. So usually their first semester of their first year, it's just like whack-a-mole. It's a disaster. By the second semester, they're like, oh my, I got to get it together. Usually by the sophomore year, they got it going on. And so I don't even mess with them that first year. I just say, bless you, and I wish your parents the very best. So I take them at the good stage when they're done with all the drinking and the partying, and they're taking things a little more seriously. Other requirements, there's a few of them. They have to submit to an MSP background check. They have to do a drug test, which I lose a few students in that part of it. Obviously, marijuana is very common now, and you can't have marijuana in your system if you're working for the state police. So for their time with me, they do receive class credit. They have to produce 140 hours of work in a semester to get 3 credit hours. They produce many, many more than 140 hours, but that's the minimum. I've had students from all over the university, people that want to go to medical school and be part of the medical examiner's office, the coroner's office, computer science, cybersecurity, engineering. It really is interdisciplinary what a cold case or a missing person case is, and I encourage it. I think that's wonderful. These students are the future of law enforcement, right? And they are going to remake law enforcement. You may have noticed in most of these pictures, they're female. I don't do that on purpose. I was talking to a few people before I started my talk. About 99% of the students that apply are female. And yeah, I think it has a little bit to do with maturity level. I think that female students might be a little bit more serious about their careers at a younger stage. It usually takes them a couple of semesters of applications before they can get in. So maybe that's part of it. But they're all female, and they're going to remake law enforcement dramatically. On that note, so just last month, the state police announced that we not only will have scholarships. So when I receive donations, like from today, my speaking fee will go into a scholarship fund. And so if you are not interested in working for the state police in some capacity, you can receive a scholarship for your work on the cold case program. Or if you're interested in a career in state police, we have the students choose one of two paths. They're going to be a cadet or eventually a detective. They're going to start off as a trooper. They're going to go to recruit school. They are going to spend time at a post, usually about 4 to 8 hours per week. They're spending time at a post. The rest of their 32 hours of the week, they're working with me in the cold case program. Or they are students that wish to work like in a crime lab. So they're going to be a DNA expert, a ballistics expert, a blood splatter person. They call it bodily fluid expert, not blood splatter. I was thinking of that show Dexter, I think. But it is kind of like that. I mean, so that they'll do like job shadowing of the same people that do that kind of work that they're interested in. They'll spend 4 to 8 hours per week working with an analyst of some sort, doing that. The rest of their time is spent with me working on cold cases. And while they're working on these cold cases, we have these experts that are coming in all the time. Last week, I took all of the students out on a field trip. We attended 2 autopsies with WMU. With the medical examiner's office. Other times we'll go to crime scenes. It makes a huge difference to hear about a case compared to actually walking in her shoes, right? Here's where she left home on her way to school. She disappeared in between. Look how short that distance was, or look how far away that guy lived from her. So we do a lot of field trips like that. And we have lab experts also that come in and talk to the students about a case that we're working on or resources that MSP has that might be able to be utilized in a case. So for the cadet or the assistant position, those students will get paid. It's actually pretty good money. They're also now considered employees of the state police. So that means when they graduate, they have access to internal jobs, and they are doing great work. They learn a lot. They, advise the detectives and the different crime experts. Let me go back a little bit. The thing that these students provide in a nutshell is they know this case, right? There's 5 to 8 students who've done nothing for the whole semester except for deep dive into this case. It's a huge win for detectives and other experts at MSP to just hear from them what the case is about, right? So the students can say, no, his name wasn't Jim, it was John. No, he did not live in Holland, he lived in Hamilton. They can pull this stuff up because that's all they're doing. As other professionals, I'm sure many of you can echo this, you're being stretched 50 different ways, right? So it's hard to deep dive just into one case, just into the facts of this case. So it's really handy for the forensic analyst to come in or the detectives to come in and hear from the students, like, here's some evidence that, believe it or not, was never tested, or it was tested, but in a really old way of testing that. And we've had advances since then. So, we recommend that material gets retested. They're really good at following social media, as you can imagine. We have a way for them to look at people's social media posts without their identity being connected to that person. It's incredible. I'm sure I don't need to tell you this. It's incredible what people post on their social media platforms. You can find out a tremendous amount about people just by researching their social media and their friends' social media posting. Other public source databases that the students can access to, like I mentioned, knowing who was living in a neighborhood at the time, who's living where, what kind of vehicles they've ever owned, those kind of things. A lot of this stuff is public source, and it's very time consuming to plow through these public sources, but it's really, really useful for the analysts and for the detectives. They do a lot of family trees just based on social media, because people will post on their social media, who's Karen? Oh, that's Aunt Karen. She's on my mother's side. They'll tell you about it. So the students are perfect for that, letting the detectives know who's related to whom. They're also really good at looking at updates in scientific methodologies, particularly about DNA testing. Sometimes they will learn about, like, for example, we just did this a couple of months ago, trace DNA. The detectives learned about it originally from one of the students who was a biology major, who was telling them about this new technology that was coming along. And then we were able to enlist somebody like a DNA analyst from MSP to come in and say, oh yeah, we do have access to that. Here's how it would work. We can't do it now, but we have a lab that can do it. Generally just doing research, they're good at that, right? We've been training them to do research projects since they started, and we hope that it's stuck, right? And now is when, they can demonstrate to the detectives what kind of key aspects in the investigation would help them. They are able to learn other things, I think, that aren't as visible, but are really important. They take classes. Of course, they take the cold case investigation class, but they're also experts in some area, like I mentioned, cybersecurity or engineering. And they're able to apply that material that they've learned from a textbook into a real world example. And I make it really real world. If the state police have told the family members of the victim that they are reopening the case, we ask the family members to come in and talk to the students to make it real world. I think that's super important, that for them deciding what kind of career they're going to choose, and to also realize the enormity of trust that we have put into them. This is no joke. This isn't out of a textbook. These are real people who are really struggling. They lost their loved one, and this is what that looks like, and what can we do to make that better. They understand, I think, by the time their semester is over, the importance of discretion and confidentiality. Could really crush a victim family member very quickly. Or you could put the entire case in jeopardy by speaking out of turn. They're given extensive training. It's actually a certificate program with the state police about confidentiality. They can't speak even to my colleagues about a case that they're working on. They can't tell their parents about it. They can't tell their lover or their roommate. It's literally, you can't say anything. And I think that's a good skill to have. They also have to manage their time very carefully, because, as you can imagine, it gets kind of obsessive, especially once you start digging into a case and you start making some headway. You very quickly, I mean, I know this happens to me. Oh my, that's all I want to do, right? I'm that far away. If you just give me 3 more hours, I can find this person, or I can. And so they have to learn that time management skill, because they have to keep their grades up while they're working for me. I think it also teaches them the importance of working with a team, because it is a team effort, both with the MSP personnel and with the students on the case. Everybody has to pitch in where they are most useful. As in addition to working on cold cases, the students do a lot of visiting across Michigan in my attempt to make sure that if they are the next generation of law enforcement, that they know what they're getting into. So we visit crime labs all across the state. This last year, the students were able to attend Detective Homicide School, which is the school that trains all detectives in Michigan, both at the city level, county level, and then the state police, in best practices, best techniques. And they were able to attend that. I mentioned the crime scenes. I require them to also do ride-alongs with troopers. I think that's important for everybody, even if you're not going to be a trooper, that you understand how challenging it is to be a member of law enforcement. So they're required to go out for at least one evening. They are required to go to pre-sentencing court hearings, motion hearings for defendants. A lot of the students want to go to law school, as you can imagine. I think that's a wonderful opportunity for them to kind of get a feel for what is in store for them. They do attend search warrants and searches. On Thursday, we are executing a search warrant. I'm going to take the whole class. It's a missing person case, and we're going to be watching the canine cadaver unit we've located 4 places on a property where we think, because of tips and ground penetrating radar, the body is buried, and they're going to watch the search warrant being executed and what all goes into that. It's a little nerve-wracking. Sometimes it can get a little testy, as you can imagine, but it's important, I think, for the students to see that. They have mentioned that they work with these other experts from MSP, and one that I forgot was interview techniques. So they take a class while they're in the cold case program on the difference between an interview and an interrogation. And then when we have, we call them friendly victim family members that need to be interviewed, oftentimes the victim family members will agree to allow the students to do the interviewing and gathering information, which I think is super important for them to be the next generation of law enforcement, to actually get that kind of experience, because it really is an art form. The students so far have ended up exclusively all ended up in law enforcement of one way, shape, or form. I love saying that I have 3 students that got picked up by the FBI. That sounds like really racy. Those are great jobs, though, for the federal jobs. They've also been, hired with obviously state law enforcement and medical examiner's office. We are working with a program now for the students that want to work for the medical examiner's office. WMU, our medical school, has a program to pay students for being death investigators now, which my cold case students that want to go to medical school are perfect for that. So they're picking up jobs even after they're outside of my cold case program, jobs that'll benefit them in the future. So we had a lot of success. The first case that we got, as I mentioned, the Roxanne Woods case. And as you can imagine, every police department in the state of Michigan and all the districts in Michigan contacted the 5th district, which is, typically who I work with the most. We want to send our case to you. We got the perfect case. We got the perfect case. So there's a lot of kind of a learning experience, a lot of learning. Oh my gosh, there's all of these cases. There's all of these police entities that think these students would be, great, but there's only one program. How do we do this? So the second case that we got was the case of Cathy Swartz. Cathy was found dead in the floor of her bedroom where she had been beaten and stabbed to death. It was a particularly violent murder, indicating that she probably knew her attacker. For those of you who follow this case, it was a really sad case. She had an 18-month-old daughter, and the daughter was in a crib next to the bed in the same bedroom where Cathy was attacked and murdered. So this really brought it very personal to the students because she was about their age and there was a young child involved. The murder weapon for Cathy was never found. And it was a complicated case because, weirdly enough, the killer, after he killed her, he went into her bathroom and showered and cleaned up. And then he borrowed her boyfriend's clothing and left the house seemingly in clean clothes. So it was kind of a weird setup. There was DNA left behind, but in 1988, the DNA that was there wasn't able to be tested in ways that it is able to be tested today. So it was his blood on her, and there was just trace amounts. So that oftentimes happens with these cases is there is DNA and the detectives knew about it early on, but you don't know what you don't know, right? In the 1970s and even the 1980s, we really don't know anything about DNA evidence. It's not until the very end of the 1980s that there's like these radical notions of DNA experts being used in court cases. But before that, we really don't know anything. So if there was a detective who had the kind of forethought to put some type of evidence like in a Ziploc bag, and that evidence was kept fairly in a climate control environment, you have a chance of usable DNA. But sometimes technology doesn't keep up with the needs at that time. So another way of saying that is in 1990, when this, or 1995, when this case was reopened, there was trace amounts of DNA found on Cathy, but we didn't have the resources to test it at that point. So oftentimes law enforcement will kind of put it on hold until DNA technology catches up and then reopen the case. And that's what happened here. The DNA was able then to test that DNA once we figured out that there was DNA available. This was a huge case. I think it was ultimately like 20,000 pages. They came in with 70 or 80 banker boxes. I have a bullpen that's about this big with tables like this, and literally the students start categorizing just thousands and thousands and thousands of pages and putting it into some semblance of order. The DNA was able to identify somebody. The Three Rivers Police Department and the Michigan State Police were able to use the FBI National Center for Analysis of Violent Crimes and a genetic genealogist to identify Cathy's killer. They located him and tracked him down. He was actually, weirdly enough, he was really young when the murder of Cathy happened. He cleaned up his act. He moved to South Carolina. He had a family. He had a very successful plumbing business. And nobody could have been more surprised than he was when the Michigan State Police came calling, "Hey, remember Cathy Swartz?" What was strange about this case is it was super exciting, just like the other case that we had helped the Michigan State Police identify a suspect to. Very, very exciting, and the students feel very proud of themselves. In this case, though, it went horribly wrong. The state police and the U.S. Marshal Service took Robert Waters into custody in Beaufort, South Carolina. They took a buccal swab DNA of him, which is clear cut DNA. This is him. Now compare it to the DNA that was on Cathy. They got a positive ID. They went back to Robert Waters and told him, "It's you. You don't have a defense." And he committed suicide that night in jail. And that was one thing that's kind of, I bring that up as an example because it's one of the things that I really struggle with. I have been going around advising other states and other universities how to do this, but I don't had the opportunity to ask somebody else how to do things. I did not expect this, right? We found out, or I was called like 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And then I had to try to figure out, what do you do in an instance like this? Do I tell the students? But it's a weekend. How is this going to affect them emotionally? Maybe it won't affect them at all, but if it is going to affect them, I need to be involved in that, definitely. But if I don't tell them, what if it gets leaked to the press and they watch it? It's all over the news here in Michigan that there's arrest that's been made. It's just a matter of time that this comes out. So that's kind of a challenge. That was really, probably about half of the students were really upset that they had been, as one woman put it, I've been involved in somebody's death. And that really was traumatizing, I think, for about, like I said, half the students. So that's kind of the challenge of this. Since it's new, it sounds like all sparkly and cool and groovy. And it is, except for I don't have anybody I can pick up the phone and say, what would you do in this situation? Have you ever had this? I didn't anticipate something like this happening. We were getting ready for the initial court appearance to happen with Robert Waters here in Michigan. I was putting together a van to take all the students down to Three Rivers. So you learn as you go along, I guess, and hopefully keep doing the right thing. And I guess that's part of the learning experience too for the students, right? Law enforcement is kind of a thankless job, and bad things happen. I mentioned that we've now kind of branched out with other members of the university community. I mentioned the university librarian, who's like the magician. I have a colleague, Dr. Monique Dogan. She has a state-of-the-art, one-of-a-kind in the United States ground-penetrating radar. She's a geophysicist, and she's been assisting on several missing person cases. She also has a drone, believe it or not. The drone is like the size of a VW bus. I mean, it's huge, and it's very impressive. I have no idea what it does, none whatsoever, but she seems to know what it does. So my students identify locations of where a body might be buried based on the case files. So tips that have come in, maybe even the defendant had talked about locations, and then she gets her crew out here. You can see there's like a checkerboard that she puts on the ground, and she uses this ground penetrating radar to identify anomalies in the soil. If one is triggered that there is an anomaly, then the question is it metal? Is it a buried vehicle or buried junk? Or is it biological remains? And that's part of what we're doing on Thursday, is bringing out the cadaver canine unit, and the dogs will tell MSP if it is bodily remains. And if that's the case, then it becomes an actual crime scene. The family members tell me all the time, they're regulars in my lab, coming in and talking to the students about what this means. Oftentimes the family members will remember details. A lot of times, the murder missing person victim knew probably her attacker. And so it's often really helpful to hear what her life was like. And most of them are women, what her life was like in the months or years leading up to her disappearance. So the family members are regular in the lab. I think it's part of their healing process too, maybe, to know that even if the students and MSP aren't able to find their family member or aren't able to find who did this to their family member, at least they know that every single stone was turned over, right? At least it sounds like when I talk to them, even when we don't find the bad guy, they feel relieved. Like, I can put this behind us now. Like, at least I know we're not going to know, instead of, well, if only if there's just one more stone we could overturn. So I think there's a benefit to the family members, even if the students aren't successful. But like I mentioned, they really have been very successful. I think it's had a huge impact on the students. The students get a ton of self-confidence, knowing that they know these cases backwards and forwards. And what is that worth? I mean, to have MSP personnel be able to question the students and they remember small details. They do Excel spreadsheets. They do, big family trees on a big whiteboard. They know this case backwards and forwards, and that's quite a resource for the state police. There's been a couple of occasions where the detectives have actually interviewed the students at the end of a case. So they're going to close it because DNA technology has not caught up with the kind of DNA that's in this case. So they know that they're going to pick up this case and reopen it in future years when technology has advanced, and they want to get everything they can from the students about the case because they've spent the most time reading and researching the case. So I do think it benefits the students to know that they actually made a difference, even if they weren't involved in resolving a case. So I think we all win ultimately. Obviously, victim family members are the big winners, but I also think we the people also win, because I think we're creating with these programs that I hope are in every state in the nation. Eventually, we're creating a really well-educated law enforcement community, right? They're learning from the very best detectives that the state police and local law enforcement agencies have, because those typically are the detectives, right? You progress in your seniority to becoming a detective, and those are the people that my students are learning from. So we benefit as a people by creating this new law enforcement community. And oddly enough, like I said, they're almost all women. So I don't know what that's going to mean for law enforcement, but it is going to change things. Out of 15 students that I have this semester, half are going to recruit school. So just as many women as male students want to go to recruit school and be a trooper. That's going to have a huge impact on our law enforcement community in this next generation. So I think we all win ultimately. So we have a social media. I'd love it if you followed us. We also have a website that we keep up with all of the cases that we have resolved, and other cases that are about to be resolved or solidified. You can always reach us, by phone or email too if you have any questions. We don't choose necessarily which cases we investigate. I'm happy to talk more about that if anybody is interested in how we decide which cases we're going to decide. There's a lot of cases here in Michigan, so we do have to be cautious about that. So, but I'm happy to talk about that if anybody has any further questions. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Questions. Number one, I was wondering if a program like CSI has just provided more opportunity for interest in this profession. And secondly, interesting that so many women have an interest in this. And what's your theory on that?
I assume you mean the TV program? Yes, the TV program. Yes. Netflix wants to do one of the mini series, where they have like 5 episodes and follow the students. I'm not really sure how I feel about that, because it's I'm sure there are people here that understand this a lot better than I do, but here's what I know about the media in my 2 short years of being in the national spotlight. It's really time consuming. I really like these, investigating cold cases. And that would be very, very time consuming, because for the 20 minutes that you and I see on the screen, it took them, 5 days to, so we're trying to work that out. On the case with Paula Zahn is in negotiations with my university to do a podcast with Paula Zahn, and that's really interesting to me, because that would be something I could take with me, that we don't have to stop all operations. I don't have to cover, you can imagine my bullpen like this. There's a lot of sensitive information in there. To get a TV crew in there, how do I do that? How do I hide all the names and the things that are on the board? And so a podcast sounds like that might be the way to go. And there's HBO wants to do a documentary too. Again, it's just, it's time consuming. And I really love, my university may have a different opinion, but for me, I love doing these cold cases. I think that's really cool. So what was your second question? Oh, why women? Yeah. I know. So it took me a while. And I mean, your guess really is as good as mine. It came up with a lot of theories, but my favorite theory is this. I think that we know with true crime shows and podcasts, the biggest audience for those are women. It's not just this program. And I saw this when we first created our Facebook page, like, wow, the audience is almost completely female. I think it's because violence is more, particularly, death is more on the minds of women on a regular basis. I know as a woman, I rarely park my car, and like if I've been asked to do this in the evening, and parking is such a big deal in Holland, that one of my very first questions would have been, where am I parking? How far do I have to walk to get into, right? Women think those things. And it's not to say that all men are violent. I'm not saying that at all. It's just always on our minds. You go out on a date, it's on your mind. You get a weird phone call, it's on your mind. And then these young women watch these true crime shows, or they get assigned a case and they say the magic words, there but for the grace of God go I, right? And I think that makes this a real world experience, crime, whether it happened to her or some woman I've never met before. It makes it real because you can identify, like the woman said in the Professor Schock documentary, this is real because she's my age. She's just like me. The woman said something like that. She's just like me. She's my age. That could have been me. I think it's that in a nutshell that attracts women to true crime, and I know with HBO and Netflix, that's who they're targeting, is the female perspective, because that's who the audience is. And I know, I mean, I get emails from women all the time that say, oh, I've watched every single podcast on the such and such. Like, geez, that's like 20,000 hours. Like, that's a lot. I don't even do that. But it's got to be, there's an incentive to do that. And I don't know, does anybody else have any ideas why it would be all female? Anybody want to weigh in? Do you? Can you say that again?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
We feel vulnerable. We read about these cases or see them on television and the viciousness. And I remember when I went to Western, we still hitchhiked.
Yeah.
Never thought.
Yeah. We just worked on a case involving a woman who was killed by Carl Eugene Watts on Western's campus in 1974. She was one of the Gloria Steele, one of the victims of Carl Eugene Watts. And so we were able to actually work essentially the Gloria Steele case, because we were linking Carl Eugene to a case that we're working on in Marshall. And it was very educational for women. And a lot of women said that, you read this and you realize how vulnerable you are. Western had created, they had this scary person on campus. Then at this time, they didn't know who it was. And women were required in 1974 to submit to a lockdown after 5 p.m. They weren't told why. They were, so I do think that there's a lot of that women say, oh, I remember something like that happened to me before, or I was afraid something like that would happen. Or remember that creepy guy that you were dating? Remember that guy? Maybe that was him. Yeah, there's a vulnerability, I think. I agree with that.
I was wondering what percentage of the victims are women, and maybe that's tied into.
Yeah, the vast majority of the cases that are cold cases in the United States are women, and especially missing person cases. Yeah, I'm sure that plays a huge role in it as well. Yeah, that's a good point.
So how do you go about selecting the cases that you?
Yeah,
got?
so what this state police have done, sorry about that. What the state police have done, and this is true in most of the states that I've worked on, they use the FBI solvability index. I don't know if you can see this very well. So they evaluate in a point system whether fingerprints were recovered, DNA, what is there. So like bullet casings as well. Do we even know who the victim is? The solvability means what is there to work with? Because unfortunately, when you're looking at cold cases, oftentimes they're really, really old cases. And, you know, evidence was not preserved or it just wasn't available. Like an example, one of the cases we're working on is a heartbreaking case, a very young girl, very, let's just say that, very young girl. And she was abducted and she was killed, but her body wasn't found for, I think, 18 months, maybe it was 16 months. So when her body's found, her clothing is partially disintegrated or pulled apart by animals. There's really no evidence, right? Other than her bones are still there and a semblance of her clothing, but there is no DNA. So you have lots and lots of cold cases, you have to, you know, kind of do this and figure out what cases have the most likelihood of being solved. They're not all created equal. And I know a lot of family members contact me and my heart just goes out to them, you know, will you please, you know, open this case? And it really isn't my decision to be made. But honestly, if your loved one's case is not open, it's my experience has been it's not evil intent on the part of law enforcement. It may simply be that the evidence wasn't preserved, or it wasn't even there in the first place, like the woman who was found out in the elements. It's hard. But we do have a list by solvability, and that's kind of what we're going off of.
Do some of these turn into serial type murders?
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking of the LA guy that was going after this, you know, streetwalkers or whatever.
Do you mean the Golden State Killer? Is that what
one of those. I mean,
we always look for that. So the first case that we resolved, that's how I started working with the librarian at my university. Patrick Gillum had he was 70 when he was arrested for Roxanne's death. Believe it or not, he had been convicted of rape in the 1970s, and he had gotten out on an early release from an Indiana prison 2 months before he killed Roxanne. I guess two things about that. That taught me two really valuable lessons. The very first thing I thought of was that, really? So he raped the woman in 1970, whatever, and then he's in prison. Then he rapes Roxanne, and then he's a good little boy? Really? For the next 40 years, really? Because, you know, rape is not about sex. Rape is about power. And very rarely is somebody able to get their fix through this power of rape and not go back and do it again. It's a psychological malfunction. And so one thing the librarian taught me is what we can find. So we literally did a neighborhood kind of canvas of all the places he had lived from the time he got out of prison until the time that he was arrested for Roxanne's murder. Where did he live? Which zip code? Which home? And then what unsolved murders of women and rapes were in that area. Now, of course, that's not ironclad because the vast majority of rapes never get reported, but we unearthed a lot about him. And I still have questions about that case. I keep threatening to go visit Patrick Gillum myself because, you know, he's a narcissist and he thinks he's a ladies' man, and I'm just the woman for him. I'd love to ask him a few questions, but of course, no resources have been put into it because he is in for life, right? So there's not it's resource potential. It would solve other things. It's just a little scary, you know, to go in there. But yeah, we do worry about that. You know, the other thing I learned about that whole case is Roxanne Woods case, we didn't know anything about him before he was identified with genetic genealogy. And so at his sentencing, we were able to meet the woman that he had raped in the 1970s that originally put him away. She had just died of breast cancer the week before he was arrested, but her husband was there. And I learned something so valuable. I was so glad my students got to learn from my mistake. The husband was talking to the students, and I'm so glad that he's off the streets. And I asked a really innocent question. I said, "What was her name?" And he fell apart. He broke down. He said, "You know what? Nobody ever asks what her name was. Her name was Maureen." And then he told us about her, and it taught me, when the students talk to victim family members, that's a person. Don't forget that. We tend to forget it. We tend to think of these things as, oh, Patrick Gillen was also convicted of some other woman. It's not some other woman. Her name was Maureen, and she mattered. That was a powerful lesson for me to learn too about that. So I think there was somebody else there.
You mentioned that universities across the country are trying to implement this program. Any others in the state?
Oh yeah, Northern Michigan University is probably the furthest along. We started working with each other right after the Roxanne Woods case, so they are very far advanced. Yeah, I've talked to a couple schools. Saginaw Valley State, they can't make it work. There's a lot of resources involved in this, right? I need a really secure lab. I need a computer lab, and a lot of schools aren't really ready to do that until I think we get more successes. That's what I'm hoping for. I actually have a meeting later today with Michigan State University. They are trying, they kind of have something, but it's not like this. And so we're trying to figure out how best to, best practices like this. But I think the other state that's the furthest along is probably West Virginia, University of West Virginia. Yeah, I've had community colleges reach out, even high school classes. I don't think it would work at the high school level because of some of the security demands, but I'm really happy to talk to them. I think that this is something we need to do. I think this solves a lot of problems, right? I think it does. Ultimately, for the victim family members, but I think in the meantime, it solves a lot of other problems too. Yes, sir.
I have a couple of questions. The first one will be easy to answer. You've had several teams of students now.
Yeah.
Has any one of those teams thought of calling themselves the Justice League of West Michigan?
Oh, no. That's a good one, though. No, the guy on what's his name, Al Roker on the Today Show pinned the Scooby-Doo crew, and that's really stuck. That they got T-shirts that say the Scooby-Doo crew. But no, that's a good one. I'll have to remember that one. I'll bring it back to the students and see what they think.
Okay, you partially answered the second question. You've talked about some success stories. Clearly, there are some that end nowhere. Can you give us some examples of where some of these investigations ended up because perhaps the evidence that was found could not be conclusive, or some of the scientific tests could not demonstrate without any doubt that something happened? And perhaps you can describe some of these tests.
Well, yes. So one of the most common things that happen is that DNA technology hasn't caught up. So we just have a trace amount of DNA, and the lab says, yeah, we can do a genetic test. We can try to find out if this identifies somebody, but that's the lowest amount of DNA that has ever been done. If we use it up, you don't have any more. You got one test. So do you want to use it now, or do you want to wait for 5 years? Because DNA technology is almost there, 3 to 5 years. So the state police will decide to hold back on it. That actually happens quite a bit. That like in one case in particular, we're pretty sure who did it. We've identified him in 5 other different ways, but to get conclusive proof for a trial, because for sure he'll go to trial. yeah, we're not going to be able, we might not be able to do that. And then that's it. It's gone. It's over. Plus, he's in prison right now for life for doing the exact same thing to 5 other women. So it's not like he's going to go do that. And maybe a different decision would be made if he's still, you know, out on the street. The most common one, and the one that gets me the most, are the missing person cases, because there's no body, right? And by definition, there's really no evidence, or the evidence is circumstantial. So one of the cases, and this one's actually been publicized, the Janet Sanders case. There's a man in Niles. He has a girlfriend in Indiana. They date for a couple of years. She says, "You're kind of creepy. I don't want you anymore." And then she disappears on her way home from work. 2 years later, he's dating another woman. They date for a couple of years. She mentions to her friends, he's a little creepy. Then she finally goes to him and says, "You're a little creepy. I'm out of here." And she also disappears on her way home from work. So there was a search warrant. This is in the 1970s. So there's a search warrant executed. They found one woman's wallet and the other woman's pill bottle buried in his crawl space, but they didn't have the bodies. And so a jury did not convict him. Other than that, there's not really any evidence. I mean, was he a creepy guy? But it's not illegal to be creepy. It's illegal to abduct somebody and kill them. But if you don't have proof of that, those are the ones that really get to me. That you know, the students there's a national database for missing people, where if a body is found in a state, during the autopsy, they'll take photographs of the face and any tattoos, any other kind of identifying information, and put it into a database. The students will spend constant 24/7, you know, for 2 weeks going through all of these missing person cases and see if they can find somebody that looks like the person that disappeared from Michigan, right? So maybe they disappeared from Michigan, but they got killed in, you know, in Pennsylvania or something. But even those are very difficult because the body has been disposed of now. And so if there was not any evidence taken, it's hard to pin it on somebody. You can, hopefully, if the body was recovered in the last 20 years, there's DNA. But if it was before that, there might not have been, or it hasn't been taken care of properly. Those are the ones that get me, because they're disappeared. We kind of know what happened, but there's just nothing. Or the little girl, that's the one that really gets me, right? There's nothing left of her other than a part of her bra, I think, and that's it, and her bones. And so there's no evidence. Do we know what happened? Yeah, kind of, but we can't pin it, you know, because there is no evidence. So those are the ones that get me the most. Does that answer your question? That's a really good question.
We have a question from online. I'm thinking of student innocence projects at various places. Is there any communication between your program and those?
Yeah, actually, that's what I did before the cold case program. Is I set up, the Department of Justice gave me a big grant to train undergraduate students to work on innocence project claims in Michigan. And so, yeah, it's very, you know, top of my mind for people that have been convicted of crimes that possibly that they did not commit, because of course the case file is already there, right? Somebody's already collected at least some of the data. So yeah, I do keep in touch with innocence projects around the country, because oftentimes we have people that we think went missing here. So going back to your missing person case, but they had connections in Arizona or Texas or something like that. So they could be missing there. That's a good question. Yes, sir. I think you're next.
I think I just answered my own question. I was about to ask, have any of your students ever felt at risk by what they learned about a case?
No, we do take precautions. Remember that thing I told you about, like when the suspect, the identified suspect, killed himself, you know, kind of learning as you go along. There was one instance, she didn't feel threatened at all, but she was on Facebook Marketplace and she was buying a vacuum cleaner from somebody. And God bless her. You know, I terrify these students within an inch of their life. If you ever violate confidentiality, you know, you not getting a job ever in law enforcement again, it's going to be the least of your problems because you're going to have to talk to me, right? So this poor little girl calls me at 2:00 in the morning one night in an absolute panic. She'd been talking to Joe on Facebook Marketplace about this really good deal on a vacuum cleaner, and it all of a sudden dawned on her that's the witness in the case she was working on. Oh my God, Dr. K, sorry, what do I do? Well, you ghost them. It's really simple. That's the easiest thing in the world. Just disappear, right? But no, nothing. I try to keep their last names out of, you know, any kind of posting that's getting more and more difficult with the national publicity. But I would think that they're really safe. I mean, talk about support from the state police. These detectives love these students. So maybe that is our saving grace, but we do take some precautions. Like we're in a locked area on campus. We have a lot of people that walk in off the street they just want to be a part of it. They want to talk to somebody in the cold case program, and we do take precautions that the students don't come in direct contact with them. So yeah, it hasn't been a problem yet. So fingers crossed. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned early on the importance of having discussions with the family members of some of the victims. And I was just wondering who initiates that kind of contact, because that could be fraught with all kinds of potential.
Yeah. So first off, I should have mentioned this. My apologies for not. I don't ever initiate. The detectives know that we are completely open to that, and when they have to make contact with the family members to let them know the case is being opened. Oftentimes, the case gets open and the family members don't know about it. Just because for various police reasons, they don't want to get the family members' hopes up, for example. But the detectives let the family members know. The cold case students would love to meet you, would love to hear what any additional information you have to say. And here's Dr. K's number. And so I let them contact me because this is obvious, especially if the body is found or the case is resolved. It's very emotional. Oftentimes with the victim family members, they will reach out to us, but then they'll say, we don't want to be involved in media. We don't want to revisit this anymore. So we want to meet the students and we want to say thank you. In a couple of cases, the family members have donated money to the program, like a scholarship in their victim family member's name. And then they want to just disappear. They don't want to be connected with the media. So that's part of the reason I don't talk about other cases we've been involved with, because the family members just don't want it continually on the news. But I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you able to comment on ongoing missing persons cases? This is my question. In the news within the last year or so, there's a young mother of 8 missing, I believe, in the Kalamazoo area. And I wondered would you be involved in that at all?
If I were, I couldn't.
You couldn't comment. You couldn't say anything. I was just wondering, it would have to be a closed case for any kind of.
No, oftentimes the law enforcement will decide to use the media for a case. They want tipsters to come out. People know something. They didn't come out in 1997 when the case happened, or 1982 when the case happened. Maybe they'll come out now, and they will utilize the students to talk to the media about what they're learning and how this case has influenced them. But unless law enforcement has made that determination, that I don't have anything to do with it. The detectives know what they're doing, right? And so I try to just step aside until they tell me they want our involvement. So that's a good question, though. Yes, unfortunately. We also may have been involved in a couple of other cases but I can't talk about those either. So
another question from online. Are your only cases murders or missing persons?
Yes. So far, that's all that we've been involved with. I am working with a couple of prosecutors around the country, including one from here in Michigan. They are interested in setting up, I think this is a great idea too, setting up similar programs to look at rape kits. So we have all of these untested, everybody with me on that. So when there's a rape that happens and the woman goes in to the emergency room, they take a sample from her, they take evidence. Oftentimes though, law enforcement here, Michigan's kind of famous for this. They didn't test the rape kits. And now that DNA has become a little more affordable, these prosecutors' offices are getting more involved in testing these and trying to link them to people. The other thing that's happened is the FBI created the CODIS database. And now it's actually really usable. So what it means is anybody convicted of a felony in the United States has their DNA taken. So the first decade that this happened, it wasn't really a very useful kind of database. There weren't enough people in it. Now that it's been going on for so long, it's a very useful one. So by testing the rape kit, they can compare it to people who are already incarcerated and maybe close out some of these rape cases. I think that's a great idea, but that is not what I'm doing at this point. That's a lot more of a formula, I think, more than these missing person and homicide cases where the evidence isn't quite that clear. And the case files are huge. This, like I said, 70,000 pages. We have one case where I think there's 30,000 pages of social media. It's a relatively recent case. There's been the Brittany Shank case out of Sturgis. There's been podcasts and TV shows and it's just massive. And that's what this program is really good at, is cultivating a usable file out of that. Yeah.
Does that mean that you lower priority to cases that actually have less of a case file, those that are ignored? Or
no, like I said, the solvability index is really what drives the boat. If there is usable evidence, if there are fingerprints taken, if it was actively worked, that's a really good sign that there might be additional information. And no, it doesn't have anything to do with the size, because frankly, the size of the paper file doesn't really affect me. I mean, these students will put 1,200 out. That's a lot. Like Detective Kuersten said on the Today Show interview. I mean, 4 detectives working full time, take them 6 months to do that. My students can do it in 2 weeks, right? So it doesn't really matter that it's large, right? It's quick that they can get to it. So no, I wouldn't say that. The size of the case makes us less likely to take it.
Ma'am, you are to be commended, obviously, for the great work that you're doing.
Thank you very much.
No question about it. Right.
I appreciate that. That's very nice.
Just kind of curious to know what your personal motivation is to do what you're doing.
That's a really good question. Nobody ever asked me that. I grew up in a cabin in the middle of Alaska. And we homesteaded. We did the whole, the Alaska thing. I don't know if I'd ever met somebody that had gone to college, but I was from the wrong side of the tracks, living in the wrong zip code, right? And I read something. My mother, God bless her, she did not have a college education, but she took us kids to a library. You guys probably wouldn't think of it as a library, but to me, as a kid growing up in Alaska, this was a library, it's a whole world. And I read something one time about being a public servant. Particularly, it was about what does a public university do, and it finds new and creative ways to make the world a better place. It really stuck with me. I thought, oh yeah, I mean, I was like 15 when I read it, but I thought, oh, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make the world a better place. And it was a little bit more difficult than that. I got a job kind of close to Anchorage when I got out of high school, and I worked for a law firm, and the husband and wife law firm, and they took me aside at about 22 and said, you're a good kid, but this is a rough place to grow up. So we'll pay for you to go to college anywhere in the United States. You just need to get out one semester, just go. And I said, I don't even know how to do that. We don't have the SAT here. We don't have the ACT. And they said, yeah, but you'll figure it out. And so I did. I came to the States. I took a semester of college, and I said, like I said, sign me up. So I do think we have an obligation to make our world a better place. And this is my contribution to a problem, a big problem. We've got, our students don't get real world experience. Victim family members, we have this huge list of cold cases, and detectives in the state coffers don't have the money to do these kind of projects. So I think we just need to be creative about how we make the world a better place. So that's my story. That's weird. Nobody's ever asked me that question before in a speech. I appreciate that.
Do we have any more questions here? Nothing online? Oh, okay, I guess we're going to wrap it up.
Thank you very much, you guys. I really appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. Be sure to fill out your evaluation when you receive it on email, okay?